All right, welcome to Wednesday Night Live, presented by Pioneer Baptist Church. I am Pastor Edwin Lugo, your regular and always host of Wednesday Night Live, and I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to get on here because I was a little bit late in posting this, and so some of you might be a little bit late in getting your eyes on here. But if you are joining us tonight, please let me know in the comment section, whether that's on Facebook or on YouTube. And I say this all the time, and it's very true. In order for this to work the best it possibly can, we need you to be involved. We need you to comment. I know we have a few regulars maybe that are out of town tonight, so your involvement is huge. So it's always great to have some regulars like Eric Kelly. He's joining us on Facebook. We greatly appreciate that. And while we're waiting for a few more people to get on, and the only way that I really know that you're on here is if you comment in the comment section. So that's always what's really helpful. It's great to have the hearts who are regularly with us uh, on YouTube. They're joining in tonight as well. Again, the only way for me to really know is if you make mention of the fact that you are here with us in the comments. There's no other way, really, for me to know. And so I know the Claytons, at least Fred and Colleen, are still out of town, and potentially a few others. And so let us know. It's a big help to us so that we can be prepared. I'm feeling my family's downstairs taking part, and so they'll probably comment sometime soon as well to let us know that they're here. But if you're joining us tonight, we want to say thank you very much. Yeah, see, there you go. My wife seems to say that. She does the waving hands or whatever it is. But glad you could join us tonight. And just going to buy, again, just a couple minutes while a few people are hopping on here. If you happen to have any problems with audio or video, let me know. Sometimes I can't tell, and sometimes I can tell. And so the only way is if you communicate with me. A few things to keep in mind, especially if you are a regular attender or member of Pioneer. And I'll say this a couple times over the weekend, but we want you to be aware. And again, just buying a little bit of time here for other people to jump on. But if you are a regular attender, member of Pioneer, or even considering visiting, this coming Sunday is our last Sunday in the Canby Grove. Our plan is to have an AM, 10:30 a.m. service and a PM service. One of the things that we've really enjoyed about the Canby Grove is all of the amenities that the campsite has to offer. It's a beautiful setting. And because of that, I asked them if they would be willing to, since it's our last time there, be able to take advantage of those things. And so, with that being said, I've also asked them to potentially allow us to move our evening service, and this is important, and I'll say it again on Sunday, to move our evening service back an hour to 7 p.m. That elongates your afternoon, but it makes the evening a little bit cooler, because one of the things we've really enjoyed is having a fire. So they're going to see if we can have maybe a fire. We're going to have hopefully some, I think what we're planning on doing, I was going to do cake and punch, kind of like a celebratory thing, but I think we're going to do cupcakes and punch. And moving it back to 7 p.m. also gives you an opportunity to eat dinner before you come. That's always the hard part. You know, we're serving dessert before maybe you go off and eat dinner, and it's, you know, kind of crazy. Although I've heard people say, maybe you have as well, it's best to eat dessert first because you never know when the rapture is going to happen. And so, you know, at least you got dessert down before anything else happens. But that is kind of what we're asking for. I have not gotten a definitive on that, but that's what we're hoping for. I do plan on sharing some thoughts, a quick maybe 20-minute devotional with you that evening, and then, but important, I will say this, that Sunday evening devotional is I've spent a lot of time in thought and prayer over that devotional, and just some things, some thoughts that the Lord has laid on my heart, especially concerning kind of the season that we're in at Pioneer that I want to share with you. And so we really want you to be there if you can be, to enjoy that with us on Sunday evening. Sunday morning, 10:30, we're going to be in Romans chapter 5. Sunday evening, our last service together there. And also, obviously, we'll have to take everything out of the grove, not just into where the nursery is, but everything's got to go. It's got to go somewhere. So it's either going to come home in my truck, or it's going to go in the trailer, or something like that. And so we want to make you aware of that. Pray for a couple of places we'll be looking at over the next couple of days for potential next week. One of them is the Maplewood Grange, which is, I don't know, I think it's an Aurora address, but it's kind of on that top of hill between Canby and Aurora. and they're open to having us there. And then on top of that, I got an email from the Wilsonville Community Center that says beginning August 8th, they would be willing to have us back in for services as well. However, with them, our service schedule may have to change. There are just some things we want you to pray about, consider. Obviously, we're still looking and praying for a permanent use facility and all of those possibilities that go along with that. So things to pray about, things to go to the Lord for, things to be prepared for. We're certainly in a time of transition, but that's okay. All right, it looks like we got a few more people on here. It looks like the Millers are here with us, and so it's glad we're glad to have them here with us. A few more viewers on YouTube, and again, I'll say it one more time. The only way that this thing works really well is if you participate. So we need you to do that. We need you to help us out as much as you possibly can throughout the night. But here we go. Today's, as you see there, the very first thing we're going to look at is today's fact of the day. As is always the case with the fact of the day, I put it up here because I think it's really interesting. And this one kind of actually caught me off guard. I was kind of surprised by it. But did you know, fact of the day, that 60% of the world's lakes are located in Canada? That's right, just north of us. 60%. I mean, I know you guys can do math, but that's over half of the world's lakes. That is, what, 3/5 of the world's lake. 3 out of every 5 lakes in the world are in Canada. I believe the exact number was, well, I shouldn't say the exact number. The round number was around 3 million lakes just in Canada. And so I thought that was kind of mind-blowing whenever I first read that 60% of the world's lakes are located in Canada. Well, at least Canada's good for something. Anyway, for those of you that are Canadians, especially if maybe, I don't know, David or Hope. I mean, David, I know you're not Canadian, but your wife is. Please do not take that as a slight. But, yeah, good job on the lakes, Canada. Not that you had anything to do with it. Anyway, on to the question of the day. So, with the fact of the day, you didn't have to really answer, so that's okay. You didn't really have to answer the fact of the day. But the question of the day, I do want you to answer. By number, not by volume. That's correct, Eric. I believe by number. They have 60% of the world's lakes. See, I don't think it's by water volume. I could be wrong about that. I'll go back and look again, but I do think that is the case. All right, question of the day. Ready? And you're going to have to think about this for a second, maybe, and then answer the question. So I want everybody to answer, whether it's no matter who it is, or if there's multiple people in the room with you, have multiple answers for it. Ready? Here you go. Here is the question of the day. I want you to think about it for a second. What is the most beautiful, oh, I should say thing, not think. What is the most beautiful thing, not think, what is the most beautiful thing you have seen in nature? The most beautiful thing you have ever seen in nature. Think about it for a second. You say, well, doesn't that include everything? Well, no, I mean, like, think about that, like, in nature, not like, oh, behold the beauty of this, slice of pizza in its natural habitat in this cardboard box, or what is the most beautiful thing, not think, what's the most beautiful thing you've seen in nature? Maybe somebody will say a Canadian lake that they saw. I don't know. But let me know in the comment section. I'll take a little bit of time. I'm trying to think, most beautiful thing I've ever seen in nature. Does my wife count? If she does, I'll take that. But it's not like she was like grazing in the field somewhere or anything like that. Okay, but that's so generic, Katie. What beach? What ocean? Because I've seen some nasty beaches, some nasty oceans I wouldn't come anywhere close to. So, what was the setting? What's the most beautiful beach that you've ever seen? What's the most beautiful ocean that you've ever seen? What's the setting for that beach or for that ocean? So Katie's got the ball rolling. Let's see here. Eric says Crater Lake. Crater Lake was the first place I ever remember seeing in Oregon, and I was 18 years old, and it absolutely blew my mind. I remember driving through the redwoods of Northern California, and then I think I slept from there all the way to Crater Lake, and it blew my mind. Cassie says the starry sky on a clear night, especially if you're somewhere with no other lights. That is absolutely amazing. I completely agree with that as well. I'm trying to think of some other places in nature that I have seen. Gabe says a waterfall at a place I can't remember. Made such a big impression. Right here. Although I will say I'm a big fan of waterfalls. Okay, so Katie comes in and says the beaches in Hawaii that Azariah went to for a honeymoon. Next is the Florida beach. Can't remember the names of them. Okay, so I can roll with that. Kauai and Hawaii, and some Florida beaches are absolutely pristine and beautiful. I mean, just absolutely amazing. Those are certainly some of the most beautiful places in the world. All right, so if you have one, let us know the most beautiful place you've ever seen in nature. If you haven't answered yet, you still have an opportunity to jump in and let us know what you're thinking. And we'd love to hear from you as we continue to move on. All right, we got the waterfall we hiked to Kauai was pretty amazing as well. See, that's the cool thing about Hawaii and a lot of other places, including Oregon's one of those places where you have multiple different places that you can see. But like in Hawaii, you have like kind of rainforesty areas and waterfalls, but you also have the beach, and it's pretty neat. Terry Cross says the view from the top of South Sister. I bet. It is true. When you get up on top of things and can see for miles and miles, is a pretty awesome thing. Let's see. Eric does chime in with a lake in Canada. Lake Lorraine is beautiful in Canada. I have to check it out when we're done here. So, put it in the comment sections. If you haven't written the most beautiful thing you've seen in nature, please let us know in the comments. We are moving on to the joke of the day. Apparently, so far, some of you have not been that impressed with the jokes of the day. But I don't care. I love you, but I still think they're funny. I asked my wife last week about the response downstairs, and she said, I think most of us rolled her eyes. And I was like, man, you guys just don't know. But I guess that's part of being a dad, is carrying the weight of all the good jokes in the house. And so it's kind of what you got to do. But that's all right. Anyway, on to the joke of the day. I'm sure I'll get more eye rolls, but one day you'll use it and you'll laugh. Did you know? Here is today's joke of the day. Ready? Did you know that dogs cannot operate an MRI machine? But did you know that dogs cannot operate an MRI machine? But, and I'm sure some of you know where this is going, but cats can. Get it? Cats can. CAT scan, MRI, CAT scan. Dogs can't, but cats can. Boom. Oh, good to see I'm guessing it's Adam Steve chiming in here doing Harley Jr. edition. He is jumping in. See, Katie Miller gives me the eye roll. Cassie gives me the eye roll. That's how I know it's a good joke, when I start getting lots of eye rolls from the ladies. See, Adam said it made me laugh. See, did you know that dogs cannot operate an MRI machine, but cats can? Boom, boom. Yes, that was a howler. Get it? Oh, dogs, cats. Yeah. Anyway. Oh, come on. If you didn't giggle at least a little bit, you just understand quality humor. Anyway, as I'm sure all of us would like to, let us move on to the book of Ruth. We're going to take a look at the book of Ruth. And again, if you're jumping in here, maybe just now catching up to the questions, the fact, or the question of the day, what's the most beautiful thing you've seen in nature? That was the question. By the way, Adam, some people mentioned some things in Hawaii as the most beautiful things they've seen in nature. Let us know what the most beautiful thing you've seen in nature. Katie Miller has a bonus dumb joke. What do you mean a dumb bonus joke? Okay, never mind. I thought you were saying, never mind. I reread it. I thought Katie said a bonus dumb joke, as in mine was dumb, and now here's a bonus one. But no, hers is just a dumb bonus joke. Okay, so we'll wait for that to come in here, and as we get ready to move through the book of Ruth, waiting on the dumb bonus joke, and also Adam, let us know what the most beautiful thing you have seen in nature is, and if you haven't answered that question yet, let us know as well, because we'd love to hear. We want to know. Oh, look at that. Nature definitely Kipu Falls on the island of Kauai. See, Katie Miller said the beaches in Kauai, and then she also said um, a waterfall on the island of Kauai. And so, anyway. Okay, here's a joke. Why should you knock on the fridge before you open it? You know the answer, don't comment. Azariah said that made me laugh. What made you laugh, Azariah? She hasn't even finished the joke yet. Or my, they're talking about bonus dumb joke or dumb bonus joke. Anyway, what's the answer, Katie? Why should you knock on the fridge before you open it? Oh, just in case the salad's dressing. I think I remember hearing that one before. The salad dressing? Was that the one? Just in case the salad dressing or something like that. I bet I'm right. Or something like that. Listen, I've got 14 years of being a dad, hearing jokes, reading jokes, telling jokes. There are a few every once in a while that I don't remember, don't hear, but that's not one of them. Anyway, on to the book of Ruth. Last week, when we jumped into the book of Ruth, I wanted us we began to look at 3 mistakes to avoid when we're dealing with hardships or tragedies. And we just looked at one last week, okay? We just looked at one last week, and if you remember what happened, Elimelech took his wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They left Bethlehem. They went to Moab during a time of famine, hoping to stay alive and to avoid the famine. And what ended up happening is Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion all die. And this is certainly a time of difficulty, both with the famine and then now with all of these people dying. And so the very first thing we looked at last week was one of the mistakes to avoid when hardships come is unbelief, the idea of running from your problems. We talked about the fact that Elimelech walked by sight instead of faith. He leaves the house of bread to go to Moab. He was focused on the physical instead of the spiritual. He was so focused on how this would affect his family physically that he didn't take into consideration how it might potentially affect them spiritually. And he honored the enemy, going to the place of the enemy, the Moabites, rather than the Lord. However, I wanted to remind you, I wanted to remind you as we were looking at some of these things, and as we ended last week, because I want to keep this in front of you all of the time, is that the book of Ruth is ultimately about how God will providentially guide and bless those who trust in Him. Trusting the Lord, even when things are hard, even when tragedy strikes, is so important. And this overriding theme in the book of Ruth tells us that God is going to providentially guide and bless those who trust in Him. And so that's really, where we ended last week. And this week we're going to look at the other 2 mistakes to avoid when hardships or difficulties hit. The first one is unbelief. The second one that I want us to begin looking at tonight is the word deception. Okay? And that is trying to hide our mistakes. Trying to hide our mistakes. Let's read together Ruth chapter 1, and I'm going to begin in verse 6. So we just looked at verses 1 through 5 last week. We're going to look at verses 6 through 18. So it's a lot, so hang in there with me. We're going to read it together. It says this: Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, and this is Naomi, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how the Lord had visited His people in giving them bread. She heard while she was in Moab that God was giving bread in the house of bread, back in Bethlehem, right? So she leaves Moab. She's going to return to Bethlehem. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as He has dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, For it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people, and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So we see the story here, right? Naomi is going back to Jerusalem. She's going back to the land of Judah. I'm sorry, she's going back to Bethlehem. She's going back to the land of Judah. And her daughter-in-laws are going with her. And she says, no, go back. It's actually amazing. She says, go back to your homeland. Go back to your gods. Don't follow me. Even if I were to get a husband today, and he was to get me pregnant today, and I were to have children in 9 months, are you going to wait around until they're grown to become your husbands? No. Go back to your land, start a new life. I can't be responsible for you. There's no man here to be responsible for you. You need to go back to your old life. And it seems like these are kind of the reasonings that Naomi gives for telling Orpah and Ruth to go back to Moab. But I actually asked the question. It's the first question I want you to think about tonight. Why do you really think Naomi told Orpah and Ruth to go back to Moab? Do you think those are the genuine reasons? And the reason I ask this is I know what we read in Scripture, right? I know what we see in the verses that we just read. I know what outwardly Naomi says, okay? But I really wrestle with the idea of a believing Jewess, right? This female Jew, she's basically encouraging her daughters-in-laws to go back to their unbelieving, false God-worshiping ways. To me, that seems, again, she's kind of weighing these ideas. She's saying, well, I don't have a husband for you, I don't have a son for you, go back. And it kind of seems like a noble reason. But really, would a believing Jew say, hey, you know what, go back to your homeland, go back to the enemy. She even says, go back to your gods. Now, that actually seems, I don't know, just seems unbelievable to me that it would be that easy for her to do that. And maybe you say, no, I think that is the reason. I think she just thought, I don't have any way to care. I don't know who's going to care for me. I don't know who's going to care for you. So go ahead. But I do think while those may be a reason or some of the reasons, I don't think that's the only reason. But I want you to think about that for just a second. Why do you think that Naomi told Orpah and Ruth to go back to Moab, to leave and not follow her, even though they initially said no, we're going to follow? She said no, leave. Why do you think she'd say that? I know I'm asking kind of an open-ended question that maybe the Bible does not speak directly to. But I do think it's an interesting thing for us to think about for just a minute. So I'll give you a second, maybe as you think about it. Why do you think Naomi told Orpah and Ruth to go back to Moab? And really you could say, no, I think you really have a couple of options. You can go, I think the reasons that Naomi stated are the reasons and the only reasons. Or, I think maybe it's those reasonings plus this other reason over here along with that. Because I understand what Naomi's saying. I think we all understand that, right? Well, in this culture, if you didn't have a man to take care of you, you'd be in a lot of trouble. Obviously, it would be the responsibility of the family to step up and take care for you. And then later on, obviously in the New Testament times, you have that New Testament church care for you and those kinds of things. And so, think about it for a second. Any thoughts? I won't sit on it for too long, but I'm waiting to see if anybody has anything. So the hearts talk about maybe the fact that Naomi was just doubting her own faith. She was just wrestling with her own faith, or that she was angry with God, frustrated with the whole situation. And I think we'll see some of that here in just a little bit. That there's definitely some some bitterness in the heart of Naomi. Um, I think one of the potentially one of the reasons could be uh, that she might be embarrassed to bring back two Moabite women back to Bethlehem with her, because those two, I would say that Orpah and Ruth would be constant living proof of the mistakes that Naomi and her family made. Again, they leave Bethlehem to go to Moab because there's a famine. And then we read a couple of verses later. I know 10 years have passed now, but God has provided bread to his people now, and it's like, oh, why did maybe we shouldn't have left. Eric says, I think Naomi also didn't want the burden of taking care. Yeah, there's a burden of taking care of these people. And Eric hits on it here. He says she also may not have wanted to face the Jews back in Judah with two Moab daughter-in-laws, right? And so here's part of the issue, and I think that is exactly part of the issue. She's going, man, I'm going to go back with these two Moabitess daughter-in-laws, and I'm going to hear about it all the time, and they're going to sit here and be living proof of the mistakes that we made, of the fact that we didn't trust God, of the fact that we didn't have faith. Proverbs chapter 28 and verse 13 though says this. It says, "He that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy." Part of the reason I think maybe Naomi wants to send her daughter-in-laws back is because she didn't want to have to constantly answer about, hey, what are these two about? I think we've seen over and over again that when we try to cover our sins, it is proof that we really haven't faced them honestly, and we haven't judged them according to God's word. True repentance includes honest confession and brokenness within. And it seems like at this point, Naomi, she kind of wants to brush all of that aside and act like that's not there. Psalm 51 and verse 17 says, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise." And it was just hit on just a minute ago. But here's the follow-up question. Instead of brokenness, what do we see in Naomi? We don't see brokenness in Naomi. Azariah chimes in. He says, when a person starts doubting God, okay, leaving Israel's promised land, it starts a downward spiral. And I think we certainly start to see that spiral in some of the thoughts and decisions that Naomi has, and we'll see it continuing here in these next couple of verses, including this question that I just asked. And I'll even give you a little hint. I think we can see it in the text. Naomi was not broken over her sin. Naomi was not broken over the sin of her family, and the heart's hit her on. It's another B letter. We see bitterness, right? Look in verse 13 of Ruth chapter 1. It says, "Would ye tarry for them till they were grown?" Talking about, if I have another child. "Would ye stay for them from having having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sake, that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me." She's basically saying, it grieves me that God has treated me this way. This is all God's fault. What's interesting to me is, had Naomi presented God, and I always wonder about this, if Naomi would have presented God in a positive way, that maybe Orpah would have come back. And rather than just having Ruth, she would have Ruth and Orpah, and both of them, while she's sitting here worried about them being, these burdens to her financially, but also, this constant reminder of mistakes that they made, that potentially they could be two trophies of God's grace. But she didn't want to do that. No. Instead, she says, "Oh, it grieves me for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. That God apparently is mad at me. God doesn't like me. God has mistreated me." Instead of being broken over decisions that her and her family made, she becomes bitter at God. But I want us to notice the contrast between Naomi and her own daughter-in-law, Ruth. Think about Ruth for just a second. Everything in her and everything around her presented obstacles. Everything. But Ruth here decides that she's going to live by faith. Her circumstances were against her, and they could have made her bitter against the God of Israel. I mean, think about this. She was a Moabite. She was not a Jew. But she marries one, and then her father-in-law dies, and then her husband dies, and her brother-in-law dies, and she's a widow without any support. And we would almost understand more from Ruth's perspective if she thinks to herself, well, if this is the way that Jehovah God, the God of the Israelites, if this is the way he treats people, then why follow him? We would actually kind of understand that if Ruth was the one to say that. But instead, Ruth's statement in verses 16 through 17 are some of the most magnificent confessions found anywhere in Scripture. And I'm gonna read verses 16 to 17. And again, this is somewhat of an open-ended question, but I want you to think about this as we read it together. Here's the question. What stands out to you about Ruth's statement here? Okay. She's going to make a statement in verses 16 through 17. And I want you to kind of dig through her words and think about what we just said, all the hardships, all the difficulties that she's gone through, and then the statement that she makes here. What stands out to you? What's impressive or what's interesting about the statement that Ruth makes? Ready? Here we go. We're going to read verses 16 and 17. It says, "And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. For thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me." So again, as we read it and we think about these things that Ruth says here in those circumstances, what are some aspects that stand out to you about Ruth's confession, her statement here to Naomi? And I have some thoughts written down here. I'll share here in just a minute. But I admitted just a minute ago this is somewhat of an open-ended question. But think about this for just a second. Think about how heavy and how packed and how loaded some of these statements Ruth says. And again, I don't want to have too much dead airtime, but give you an opportunity maybe to type out an answer, because I know sometimes it can take a little bit, and I'll look at my answers as well while you're doing that. And again, maybe you want to take a minute and read verses 16 and 17 again. Anybody? I'm sure maybe at times you'll type out some of your answers. I'll just mention and share some of the things that I have written here. It's amazing that she confesses her love for her mother-in-law, and that she says, I want to stay with you until you die. So Eric mentions Ruth's loyalty to Naomi to the point of death, leaving all her past behind. I mean, think about both the dedication but also the faith to do something like that. And that she does that. She confesses faith in the true and living God. And she was even willing, and we'll read it in chapters to come, in chapter 2. She was willing to forsake father and mother in order to cleave to Naomi and to the God of her people. Ruth, the Bible tells us, was steadfastly determined to stick with it. As a matter of fact, let me read. I think let me find it here. Verse. I don't have it here. I don't actually think I have it on screen. I have it right here though. Verse 18. It says, "When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her." She was determined to accompany Naomi, and she was going to live in Bethlehem, and she was going to live with God's covenant people. One of the really interesting things about this, and there are some different thoughts about it, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy clearly tells us that no Ammonite and no Moabite should enter into the congregation of the Lord. And I mean, there was this exclusion of Moabites into the congregation of the Lord. And so it obviously begs the question, how is it that Ruth can come in so easily? In reality, I think there's a great picture of like we talked last week about New Testament salvation here. She had to trust in God's grace and throw herself on his mercy. The law excludes. Think about this. We're going to talk about this even more as we get into the book of Romans. The law excludes from the family of God, right? But grace includes people in the family of God who put their faith in him. When you read the genealogy of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 4, you find the names of 5 women, 4 of which we know have these very questionable credentials. Tamar, who committed incest with her father-in-law. Rahab, we know, was a Gentile harlot. Ruth, who was this Gentile Moabitess, right? And then the wife of Uriah, Bathsheba, who was also an adulteress. And you begin to wonder yourself, how in the world do all of these people, right? Somebody that was involved in incest, somebody that was a harlot, somebody that was somebody else that was an adulterer, somebody that was a Gentile Moabitess. How did these people ever come to be part of the bloodline? How did they ever become part of the family of the Messiah? And very simply, the very simple answer again is the grace of God. The grace of God. And it's important for us to understand that when it comes to our past, when it comes to our sin, when it comes to our mistakes, the last thing we want to do is be deceptive, act as if they never happened, and instead to throw ourselves on the grace of God. So we've seen 2 mistakes to make when hardships hit. One is unbelief. Number two is deception. Then we're going to look at the last one, and that is this: bitterness. Bitterness. The Hearts mentioned it just not too long ago. Bitterness. The idea of blaming God for all of our trials. Look at the last couple of verses of Ruth chapter 1. I'll have some questions in here for you. Verses 19 through 22 say this: "So they too went until they came to Bethlehem. And they came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them, and they said, Is this Naomi? And she said to them, Call me not Naomi, call me Mara. For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest." This is a question I want you to think for just a minute, and you're just gonna. This is gonna maybe you can look it up, but maybe some of you know this by heart. Does anybody know what the name Naomi means? What does the name Naomi mean? Anybody know that? Maybe from some other time you've learned it. Maybe you have a study Bible there and it can tell you. Maybe you can take just a minute to look it up. But I think this is interesting. I think it's very pertinent to the point that's being made here. But I'll wait for just a second. Somebody know what the name Naomi means. Maybe you have somebody in your family who's named Naomi, and or maybe one of you thought about naming child Naomi, and you're familiar with that, or maybe you just know somebody, or maybe you just remember hearing it from some time in the past. What does the name Naomi mean? I know. Give it just a second here to see if anybody comes up with the right answer. What does the name Naomi actually mean? And again, like I said just a minute ago, I think the reason I want to sit on this point for just a second is because I do think it's very important to the overall idea, the overall point that is being made here. The name Naomi, I haven't seen it pop up on my screen. I want to wait just a little bit here. So Adam actually jumps in and says the name Naomi means pleasant. Okay, the name Naomi means pleasant. However, let's go back and read these verses again. It says in verse 19, it says, "So they went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them, and they said, 'Is this Naomi?'" Well, what an interesting question. The Bible doesn't tell us a whole lot about what Naomi looked like. We don't know a whole lot about her spirit, but I have a feeling that Naomi was probably very pleasant to look at, and she may have had a very pleasant spirit, but apparently when she returned, she wasn't pleasant. She certainly wasn't the same woman. And by the way, can I just say this? Hardships have a way of doing that to you. Hardships have a way of making people who used to be pleasant hard. They don't have to, but sometimes it happens. And instead of allowing these hardships and trials that Naomi and her family are going through to allow them to make her better, and you've heard this before, and instead of allowing them to make her better, they have allowed her. She's allowed them to make her bitter. As a matter of fact, she goes on and she says, I'm going to find it here. And she said unto them, "Call me not Naomi. Don't call me pleasant. Instead, call me," she says, "I got a new name that I want you to call me, and it is Mara." Now, here's the next question, right? What does the name Mara mean? And there's certainly hints. It's not a hard one to figure out. There's hints in the verse. There's hints in the point that we're talking about here, right? What does Mara? She said, "I don't want you to call me Mara anymore." She's probably saying it in a very unpleasant tone, with a very unpleasant attitude. That which used to be pleasant, Naomi, pleasant. Again, probably pleasant to look on, pleasant to speak to. She was a pleasant person. Is now coming in huffing and puffing and saying, "Don't call me that anymore. For the Almighty that dealt very bitterly with me." Right? Okay? And so Adam chimes in and Eric at the same time. It means bitter. Mara means bitter. So here's this woman who used to be pleasant, and now she's saying, "Don't call me pleasant anymore. Call me bitter." Because God has dealt, basically she's saying, because God has dealt unfairly with me. It's not fair. Now, I'm gonna ask this question. I want you to think about it. Okay, this is just practicality here. But I think it's an important practical question for us to think about. What are some practical ways we can guard against bitterness when things are difficult for us? I think it's quite apparent that Naomi did not guard her heart against bitterness. And again, we don't have 10 years of all the details of everything that's going on. I'm not saying things were easy for Naomi. She lost her husband and her 2 sons. She dealt with a famine. She had to leave her home, and then she had to resettle the home, and then she had to leave that one and go back. And I'm not saying life was not easy for Naomi. I'm not saying that by any means whatsoever. But she's even publicly saying, "God is obviously against me. I'm bitter about it." So I think we can all agree, even though things were difficult, she didn't guard against bitterness. What are some ways that we can guard, very practically, what are some ways that we can guard against bitterness when things are difficult for us? Just practically. And I don't have a list of things here. That I'm going to share. I want you to tell me what are some practical ways for us to guard against bitterness. Okay. So the hearts bring up a major one. Remember Christ crucified. So what do you mean by that? Well, no matter what hardship you go through, you weren't nailed to a cross. You didn't bear the sins of the world. You didn't have a spear thrust through your side, or crown of thorns placed, pressed into your head. You weren't scourged to the point of being unrecognizable. Okay. Um, Eric mentions a great one. Count your blessings, and those things help from being bitter in hard times. I think it's important. Um, whether that's saying them out loud, sharing them every day at the dinner table, or sharing them with other people. I've told this before. Brother Mike and Miss Sherry, our pastors back in North Carolina, they used to keep a little booklet that they called, and it actually comes from the book of Ruth. They always kept a little booklet that they entitled "Handfuls of Purpose," what they called it, and all it contained were all the special blessings of God in their life. And it was they always kept a record of it. They wrote it down so they could always go back and remind themselves of the blessings of God. Adam chimes in again from my personal experience. I need to be totally alone with God and spend a solid amount of time with Him, asking Him for help. And I think that's huge. God, help me. There's a tendency for me to become bitter. Cassie mentions that same thing: immersing yourself in God's Word and remembering and clinging to those promises of God. What else? You think of anything else? You're welcome to share some things. And by the way, please do. Even if we move on from this point, I think it's important for us to share these practicalities with us, because guess what? Every single one of us are going to be in a hardship where we feel a tendency to become bitter. We're going to feel that. We're going to feel that pull, right? Because we can't control the circumstances of life, but we have been given the ability to control how we respond to them. And by the way, that's what faith is all about. Faith is daring to believe God is working everything out for our good, when nothing that we see or anything that we feel makes us feel like that's actually happening. Okay? Faith is believing that God is working everything out for good, when everything we see and everything we feel says, no, He's not. No, He's not. But just as a reminder, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 18 says, in everything give thanks. And I think this is important. Okay, I want to pause here for just a second and realize it does not say for everything give thanks, but in everything give thanks. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. This isn't always easy to obey. It's not always easy to obey. Okay, but I do believe that obeying this command is one of the best antidotes against a bitter and critical spirit. There's a Scottish preacher by the name of George H. or J.H. Morrison, or no, not J.H. J.H. Morris. We all know J.H. Morris. G.H. Morrison. He said this. He said 9/10 of our unhappiness is selfishness, and is an insult cast in the face of God. And because Naomi was imprisoned by selfishness, look at all these things that God has done to me. God's been unfair to me. She was bitter against God. And before we go, I don't want us to close with Naomi's bitterness. Okay, so we're not going to do that. Because what's really interesting to me is that Naomi is bitterly speaking about all of the bad things that have befallen her. But this is the last question I want us to think about for a second. What are the positives in Naomi's life that you see just from reading Ruth chapter 1? Okay, if all we know is what we read in Ruth chapter 1, I want you to type out for me. What are some of the positives in Naomi's life that she's so focused on all of the negative and all the difficulties and all of the hardship that she's looking right over the blessings of God and missing it. Okay, I want us to think, let's just take a minute and let's think about all the good things that she has going. If all you have is what you read in Ruth chapter 1, sorry. What are some of the blessings that we see in Naomi's life? I'll give you a minute to answer those, and then we're almost done here. We're getting ready to land this plane, okay? But if that's all we have, if that's all we see, and I do have some. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 of them listed here at least. That we have here. So let's see here. Yeah. Okay. So I have a couple of them. Adam actually mentions the first one. She's alive. Elimelech, dead. Mahlon, dead. Chilion, dead. Her husband, her 2 sons, dead. Orpah, gone. Who knows what's happened to Orpah, right? She's alive. Adam says, another day of life is always a praise. Okay? It's always a praise, right? She's alive. She survived. The Harts mention another one. She had a homeland to return to. She has opportunity here. She has a chance to go back to Bethlehem. She has a chance to go back to where there's bread. She has a potential family to go back to. She has something to go back to. She has these opportunities. Somebody's one time rightly said, when the night is the darkest. It's funny that Cassie mentions the most beautiful things that she's seen in nature is the beautiful night sky and the stars in those dark nights. But when the night is the darkest, we can still look up and see the stars. Guess what? Even in her darkest moment, Naomi had stars to look up to. She had opportunities that were there in front of her. Eric mentions the same thing. She was able to return home. Okay? Another one Eric mentions and Katie mentions, she gained a daughter. She gained 2 daughters. And Eric mentions, this is so true, my mom of 3 boys was very happy to have daughters. My mom is the same way. I promise you, I think my mom probably loves Cassie more than she loves me. She'd kill me about it. She heard me say that. But yeah, I mean, they just, she has Ruth, right? Somebody there to live life with her, a daughter and a friend. But more important than all of those things, more important than a homeland to go back to, more important than a life to live, more important than the fact that she has Ruth, we still haven't had the major one mentioned, and that is she still has God. In this little book, and I want to make sure I make the statement correctly. I think 4 chapters. Okay. 4 chapters, 4 really short chapters, and Azariah mentions some as well. She raised 2 sons. She gained 2 daughters-in-law. Right? She has the faith of a Jewish woman. I mean, she has all these things going on. But in 4 very short chapters, the name Jehovah is mentioned no less than 25 times. It's interesting. We have 2 books of the Bible that are named after women. Right? We have Esther and Ruth, and the idea, this providential blessing and control of God, even in difficult times, that they kind of parallel each other in that way. But there are also very interesting differences between the 2, and this is one of them. We know in the book of Esther that God's name is not mentioned once in the book. But in 4 short chapters, Jehovah is mentioned no less than 25 times in the book, and it serves as a reminder that even in the midst of those difficult hardships, God is still there. She still has that. And I don't want us to miss how the book closes, or how the chapter closes. In verse 22 it says, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. The Bible tells us they get to Bethlehem, and it's the beginning of barley harvest. It's barley harvest when these 2 widows return to Bethlehem. Barley harvest was a time when the community would come together and they would express joy and praise to God for his goodness, for giving the bounty that he'd given. This barley harvest would actually happen in the springtime. Think about spring for just a second. Spring is the idea, or it's a time where we think about new life springing forth. We think about spring as a new beginning. Alexander White often told his Edinburgh, Scotland congregation that the victorious Christian life is a series of new beginnings. And he was right. Naomi was about to make a new beginning. And here's the awesome thing, that even in the trials, and even in the difficulties, and even in our mistakes and our sins and our deceptions and our unbelief and our bitterness in those times, okay, it's never too late to start over again. And this is what I'm about to tell you here, is this is the point I want us to end on, okay? And I think it's very important. With God, okay? With God, your resources are always, 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 always greater than your burdens. Did Naomi have a lot of burdens? Yeah. I can imagine. I can imagine being uprooted from my home by my husband, going to a different place, trying to settle there. My husband dies. My boys die. We still don't have any food. I've now got 2 daughters-in-law. I'm coming back. Everything seems to be falling apart. I mean, there's lots of burdens there. But with God, your resources are always greater than your burdens. Don't ever, ever forget that. And so when things get hard, and sometimes we can cross our arms and we stare off into space and get frustrated. Really, when things get hard, stop staring at the wall. And by faith, get up. And by the way, as we've been saying for a long time, get up and keep looking up. Why? Because with God, your resources are always greater than your burdens. And guess what? Naomi and Ruth were about to find that out. Because we're going to turn the page to chapter 2, right? And they're going to arrive in Bethlehem. And God's going to start to work out some really neat things here. We're going to be introduced to Boaz and how God's going to start meeting those needs. How he's going to providentially take care of those who trust in him. So I want to remind you again as we finish out here. With God, your resources are always greater than your burdens. If you walk away from here tonight and you think of one thing for the rest of this week that sticks in your mind, my resources are always greater than my burdens. With God, by faith, my resources are always greater than my burdens. Then troubles and tribulations don't have to lead to unbelief. They don't have to lead to deception, hiding sin. They don't have to lead to bitterness. They can actually lead to great blessings from God as we walk by faith with him. Thank you again for joining us tonight through the book of Ruth. Your additions to it have been extremely helpful, especially on a night where we had a few people who would regularly be with us who are out, and hopefully we can have them back in the coming weeks. But I hope tonight has been a help and a blessing to you. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and we will talk to you later.